Welcome back to the Defying the Odds podcast. Today we are grateful to have Zach Bell on as a guest. We will explore Zach's story of growing up in the Yukon to going to the Olympics for cycling. And at the end of the episode, we will hear from one of his coaches who he mentions in the podcast. Join us on this journey as we learn how he defied the odds.
From what I know is like you grew up in Watson Lake, right?
Yep, that's right.
And then, so how did you get in? Because you went from Watson Lake of probably 1,000 people and you were able to go to the Olympics. Like, how did that happen? Like, that's an insane story. I don't think anybody would have that kind of story.
Yeah, no, it's just the easiest way to do it, really, if I'm honest. Like, and actually, I kind of believe that. I tell people it's for Yukon that all the time. Like, no, but I mean, my path was pretty. From my perspective, I mean, it was relatively straightforward. My dad was a phys ed teacher there and an outdoor ed teacher, and so I just kind of grew up with a household that was just physically minded. We just every spare moment I had was doing something active, and and it wasn't all structured. It was very, very dynamic. Lots of different activities that were, some sport, but some just generally being out in the world and like what we call like physical literacy type activity now, right? But it's just climbing trees and chasing animals and doing all that kind of stuff. I mean, so I wrestled was my primary focus once I got into high school, but I was still doing basketball and badminton. Even towards the end, I was doing some drama stuff where I was doing swing dancing with partners and that kind of thing. To keep the story relatively short, that led to going to University of Calgary as a wrestler. I did 2 years of varsity with the UFC Dinos, and just that whole time, I was on this path of wanting to go to the Olympics, and it started with a visit from an Olympian named Chris Wilson, who came probably when I was 11 years old to Watson Lake on an RCMP chartered plane to speak to the school and the wrestling program.
Wow.
And so he spoke to us, and I remember thinking, like, this guy's a pretty normal guy. Like, there's nothing really weird about him, and it just made me think, like, okay, well, this is like something that normal people do then. And that just kind of stuck with me right through to university. And I ended up leaving the wrestling program there because it was clear I wasn't making the gains I'd need to kind of make the Olympic team in that sport. Picked up cycling as kind of a side thing afterwards. I'd done it touring with my dad. We'd ridden to Liard Hot Springs and done it, the Klondike route and that kind of thing. But hadn't really raced before, and picked it up just to stay fit again, and ended up in the oval program there to train through the winter, and then started racing. And within 8 to 10 months of picking it up, it was pretty obvious I had some physical skill, and I actually had it tested at the university lab there, and had some of the professors say, like, you should maybe think about doing this. So then I just kind of picked up the Olympic dream again, and was like, well, I guess maybe I can go after this. So I mean, that's it in a nutshell. We can kind of go into any parts of it you want in detail, I guess, but
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
that was the path.
that's incredible. When you were 11 and the Olympian got flown in on that charter plane with the RCMP, is that kind of when you decided, like, hey, I just want to go to the Olympics. This is what I'm going to do. Was that the kind of the moment you were thinking about it, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's when it switched on. That's when I was like, I can be an Olympian. I'd probably been exposed to, by that time, like maybe one Olympics, and that would have been probably 1990, whatever, 92 kind of era. So it was probably like right on the heels of some of the first like really big televised Summer Olympics that I would have seen. And I mean, he kind of sat down, and the thing that struck me about him was, like, he was small. His whole genesis story was like very similar to where I was at. Like, he was an undersized kid when he was little, and wrestling had kind of given him this opportunity because he couldn't play the sports up against some of the bigger guys, but because it was weight class, he had this opportunity. And but other than that, he was kind of quiet and very focused, and not sort of your like movie bravado type sports hero. And so that kind of resonated with me because I was, even from a young age, like I was sort of meticulous about how I did things, and sort of very inward looking on how I assessed my performances in school or whatever. It was more about what I thought about how I did than external factors all the time. And he kind of had that same approach, or that's how he outlined it to us anyway.
Yeah,
So.
no. Um, when you went to wrestling at UFC, and did you make the choice then to leave wrestling because it's just like, as you said, it was just not for you? And then did you decide that I'll try cycling, or just like fall in your lap? Because like going from that, like, those are two different things entirely. That's a unique transition.
Yeah. I made the choice to leave wrestling. It was difficult. It was really difficult. I'd carried this torch for the Olympics, and I was going as a wrestler. Like that was the dream I had as a kid. I was going as a wrestler, and when I figured out it wasn't going to work, it was the first really significant, I guess, failure, I'd say, in my life. Was like, I'm not going to go. And I remember the day I left. I did a run with the team. We did these 6 a.m. runs at the university, and I came back. It was the start of my third year, and the coach was waiting for us outside, and I let everybody go in, and I just told them, I was like freaking tears running down my eyes, like I'm a grown man, like crying in front of a university wrestling coach, super hard situation. I said, I can't do this anymore. Like I'm done. And he was great about it. Like I was actually friends with those guys and attended Olympics with some of the UFC wrestling coaches, and met up with them in the village, which was super cool. Kind of a side story, but then the transition was like, I was a Tour de France fan even when I was a wrestler. So my dad grew up with it on in the house. He put it on in the house when it came on, and we'd watch that. I didn't really know many of the other races, but also, so we'd watch the wrestling at the Olympics, track and field, and then we'd watch track cycling too. So cycling was always kind of around in the house as kind of a participatory sport, whereas the other ones were quite competitive. So for me, it was just like, this would be something I'd like to try. And I knew, training at the University of Calgary, that they had a cycling program at the Oval, because we would run at the Olympic speed skating Oval in the mornings, and there'd be these groups of guys on stationary trainers, just like riding bikes. And I remember watching them and thinking, like, these guys hurt themselves in that context more than I've seen any other athlete hurt themselves. And I like that. Like, I like the idea. Wrestling was getting hard on me because I was in a situation where the other athlete, once you get to a certain level, the other athlete puts you in a situation of pain until you do something that they want you to do. And so I was never really willing to push the envelope that far to put somebody like on the verge of injury. And so I was always on the receiving end, and cycling really appealed to me because the way you make other people hurt in cycling is by hurting yourself. And I was okay with that. So that's kind of how the psychological connection went. I was like, I think I can hurt myself more than just about anybody. So this might work well for me, just as a sport for enjoyment, which sounds really maniacal, but yeah.
No. So, and I have a lot of questions here now with this. I know they're not the same thing, but did you ever follow like WWF when growing up? Was that like something you were interested in?
God. Oh, I hated it.
You hated it? Okay.
Oh man, it was.
I figured, but
like I was a purist, right? And I was like, this is such a joke. Like, and the number of times I had to answer questions about that just drove me crazy. But one of the first people I met from the Calgary scene was actually one of the Hart brothers.
Oh wow!
So they were actually involved in the regular wrestling scene too. So they started in the regular wrestling scene. A lot of them were regular amateur wrestlers, and then they went on to, of course, be a part of the WWF at the time. But we had Brett the Hitman attended one of the provincial events that we did once, and because his brother was there with his son, and yeah, I went to wrestling camps with them and stuff. So there was kind of a connection, but I was always kind of rolling my eyes about the whole scene for sure.
Yeah, no, exactly. Other people who have wrestled, like more friends than anything, they're either like love it or hate it. And most of the people, they hate it because they like
Oh yeah,
WWE is so fake, and they're like, well, why do you fake? And everything goes on.
yeah.
It's pretty good. So when you transitioned to cycling at U of C, you kind of got into it, and you said you were going for almost like maybe 8 to 10 months before it became like, hey, I might be good enough to make the Olympics.
Yeah. Yeah. So you just want to know like what sparked that light, or what? Sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't really
No,
understand the
that's okay.
question.
That wasn't even a question. I was just making sure I was getting it right.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So at that point, at like you're 10 months removed, or sorry, you're 10 months into cycling. And what was the point where you realized like, hey, the Olympics could actually work for me for this? Because you had just picked it up, and in 8 to 10 months at 20 years old, most people are like, oh, I've been doing this for almost a year. Oh, I'll go for the Olympics. Why not? It doesn't.
Yeah. Well, the moment I kind of figured it might be possible was I I was always around the kinesiology department at the University of Calgary, because that's where the wrestling team was, and that's just kind of when I arrived there, that was kind of home, even though it wasn't the program I was in. I just, it's where the gyms were and that kind of thing. Um, and they have these at the time, before it was kind of pre-Facebook and everything. They have those flyers that you put up with the little numbers that you can pull off of them. People selling
Oh,
bikes
yeah.
and whatever, this kind of thing. And they had one. The kinesiology department always had these ones up for people recruiting for studies for master's students and PhD students and that kind of thing. Different physical studies that they did at the high performance lab there, which is like one of the best high performance labs in the world. And I saw one that was on it was a cycling based study, like it was all going to be done on stationary bikes. And I was just like, well, this might be cool. Like I'll try and do one of these. Like I got some spare time now. I'll try and do one of these. So I pulled it off, and they brought me into the study. And the study was, to this day, still one of the most difficult physical things I've ever done. So what they were trying to figure out was, they were trying to figure out if a short burst of intensity training could actually increase your cardiac output, so increase the amount of blood that your heart would move per stroke. And so what we did is we go in, we do this maximal effort test every morning for, I think it was 8 days, and then based on that maximal effort test, so like a MAP test or a ramp test, there's a lot of different names for it, but basically you go to failure, and then based on the numbers you hit that day, you would do a series of 3 workouts after that were just designed to just ruin you, right? And you did it every day for 7 days. And at the beginning and the end, they did this measurement where they kind of injected you with this dye and then turned the lights off. It was very like X-Files, but it allowed them to measure the amount of blood flow that was actually going through your heart. And so on one of these maximal effort tests, I hit some crazy number on this VO2 max test, and the master student left and came back with the supervising professor, a guy named Doc Smith, who went on to, or currently, or at the time, was looking out for Cross Country Ski Canada. He also worked with Cycling Canada later with me. But he just watched my test. And then after the training for that day, he kind of took me aside and said, like, he's like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Well, I'm a student. Like, what do you mean? What do I do?" He's like, "Well, what's your background? Like, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I said I was a wrestler, and now I'm just cycling kind of for fun." And I saw this test and kind of told him the scenario, and he just was quiet for a second. He said, "Huh?" He's like, "You should do this." I'm like the test. Like, I'm doing the test. Like, I'm not going to back out of the test. He's like, "No." He's like, "You should do this. Like, you should do cycling for like a living or for real or whatever." I don't know how he phrased it, but he's like, "You should try and do this," because he's like, "I've done this." He's like, "I've been doing this for 15 years and doing this kind of testing for 15 years." And he says, "For your size, you have the biggest cardiac output I've ever seen."
Wow.
So he's like your heart moves more blood. He's like, some of your other parameters obviously like still need training and stuff, but he's like, your heart moves a crazy amount of blood for your size. So that kind of set me on thinking like, okay, like maybe I'll give this a go. And of course there was lots of other things to learn, and it wasn't quite so straightforward, but it gave me the confidence to know that I had the physical engine to actually participate in the sport in a real kind of serious level.
Yeah. So then what do you do? Like most people like get started at younger ages and there's like easy avenues for them, or not easy, but like there's avenues they know how to go.
Yeah.
Did they put you in touch with somebody, or do you just like, okay, I'm just going to start cycling. I'm going to go find some races. Like, this is how I'm going to do it.
Yeah. My entrance into the sport was like kind of a really bad, like National Lampoon scripted thing. Like it was terrible. Like I went and knocked on the door of the Olympic Oval program because it was the only program in town that I knew was a quote unquote cycling program. And the woman running the program at the time was Tanya Dubnikoff, who's a Canadian Olympic track sprinter. So I kind of knew who she was watching her at the Olympics. She opened the door and I said, "Yeah, like this is my name. I want to join the program." And she's like, "Oh, good, good." She's like, "What kind of bike do you have?" And I was like, "Well, I don't have a bike." And she kind of like laughed me out of the room, and she's like, "Yeah, man, like come back when you're serious." So like I went, found a bike on Craigslist or something, and bought this road bike, and went right back to her door and knocked on it again, and was like, "Hey, I'm back. I have a bike." She's like, "Yeah, but like I run the elite program, so like you're gonna have to come to the club program." I was like, "Yeah, that's fine. When's the club program?" So she tells me when it is. I come first day in the club program, open the door, and when I open the door, somebody's got their bike leaning up against it, and I nudge the bike out, and it knocks down. I'm gonna say like probably 25 bikes in a row, knocks like 15 people off their stationary bikes and their rollers, and I'm just standing there like a deer in the headlights, like I'm here for the program, like yeah. So like nobody would ride beside me for like the first year because I was constantly falling off the stationary bike, and like
Okay.
it
So
was
they must have had a nickname for you. What was your nickname? Like,
Oh, it was like I can't remember what it was, but like one of my best friends, he was in my wedding, and he was like, "Dude, you were just a train wreck." Like he was the only guy who would ride with me, and yeah, he it was just it was a mess. It was a mess, but like I was like pretty unfazed because like I wasn't there for any of them, and I was just kind of always looking at the next goalpost. Like something they kind of taught us in wrestling was like always look at the next street light. When you're on a run, kind of thing. Like it's always the next street light. And for me, it was always just like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And it was categorized, and so it was always just like, okay, if I can't do this, then I'm just going to go and practice it until I can. And that was kind of the pathway. And once I knew I had the physical ability, I knew it was just a matter of like learning the things I needed to learn.
yeah. So you sound like you really were able to overcome like a lot of obstacles. Like you just didn't take no for an answer. Like you really showed a lot of resiliency, like going and just keep
I,
knocking on the door until they said you were in.
I mean, I guess so, but looking back on it, that's the way it looks. But honestly, like coming from like the Yukon and coming from the types of programming we have up there, like people just don't say no to you. Like
Yeah, that's
like
true.
there's always room in the program. There's always opportunity. Like you want to be on the Arctic Winter Games team, like yeah, sure. Like like we'll find a spot. We'll find a sport for you. Like it works, right? And so I think at the time it was more that really than anything, because that was my experience with sport up until that point, was that it was just this insanely inclusive thing.
Yeah.
And wrestling was the first thing that hadn't really worked out for me, and so that to me was the anomaly, and not like having insane amount of opportunity and things that just work out. But like yeah, looking back, probably that sort of uh you know um attitude or whatever was definitely sort of ingrained in me, like just as normal, like just oh yeah, well, somebody will say yes, just keep going.
So like I this on a side note, I want to find out that lady that you mentioned earlier. I want to go get her for the podcast now because I can only imagine her response when like this guy shows up for a cycling, doesn't have a bike, comes back the next day with a bike. Like it must have been
Yeah,
quite entertaining.
yeah, Tanya would be good. Yeah, she'd be
Yeah,
good
I'll
practice.
have to track her down.
Hey guys, producer Liam here. Just want to take a quick second to thank Northern Youth Abroad, who were generous enough to help us start our project. They helped make an idea into a reality with their funding for Northern Youth, and we are very thankful to have their support in helping us with our project. Anyways, back to the pod.
Um, so you start getting in this program, you're going. When was the kind of the stage like when you qualify for the Olympics, or you were able to like, hey, I'm going to go to the Olympics? Like when was that point?
um well, I mean, it didn't. There wasn't really like there wasn't like a moment when I knew I was going to go to the Olympics, other than like once you qualify, you know you're going to go. But
Yeah.
I think when I really thought it was real was down the road, probably 2 or 3, probably 2 years down the road. Tanya was actually coaching me then, so I kind of made it into her program. She was now my coach, and I think Athens Olympics was on, and we were watching that, and I got a phone call from her, and she said, "What are you doing to get ready for Beijing?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" She's like, "Beijing is like your Olympics. What are you doing to get ready for Beijing?" And it was the first time. It was the first time that conversation had gone from I'm getting ready to go to the Olympics to I'm getting ready to go to a Olympics, like a specific one. So it put a timeline on it. It made all those things that you needed to actually achieve by then like very real. And so I mean that was kind of like when I was like, okay, here's somebody who thinks that I can go to a very specifically marked games, um, and so that's kind of when probably I decided like, okay, this is actually realistically going to happen, because at that point I think I'd maybe done one national team project for like a small event, and I'd probably just got back from it a few weeks earlier, maybe like a month earlier. So yeah, I mean that's kind of how that transitioned, I guess.
Okay, perfect. Do you need to take a break at all and get some water or anything? Or are you still going good?
I'm all right. Yeah.
You're good? Okay, I'm just gonna take a quick drink here and like that. Okay, perfect. So, you see your career path. When you qualified for the Olympics, what was the feeling that you got? Was it relief? Was it you finally achieved something that you've been pushing yourself so hard for? Was it like just an overjoyous feeling? What was going through your head?
Um, it was. I mean, it was weird, like because it was sort of contentious when I qualified for Beijing. So everybody likes to think it's just like this switch and you get this letter and it's like you're on the Olympic team, but it my experience has very rarely for any big games been quite like that, because there's a lot of people vying for those spots, and the way that the selection criteria are generally written give associations a certain amount of leeway to be able to pick people in the event of I don't know, injury, or things that might take the best player out of the game for some reason, and so they give coaches and selectors like a bit of wiggle room, but then it also leaves the door open um, for protests, like for people to be able to take it to the court of arbitration, or the association, and basically protest the spot. So I got selected and immediately got thrown into an arbitration to keep my spot, because the criteria wasn't written super clearly as to how that spot got qualified. And so yeah, so it was weird, because I basically went into judicial mode like right away, um, knowing I was going to have to defend the spot.
Oh, you're the one who
And,
has to defend the spot.
well, you can hire somebody, but it's really
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah. No. Oh,
So
wow. Okay. I thought the Olympic Committee was like, since they
no,
selected you,
no.
they'd be like,
So
oh, this is our guy. This is who we're rolling with.
well, sort of. So the yeah, so the association defends the spot, but they're really poorly organized generally. So they're usually really on their heels already and just trying to keep everything. Sporting Canada is great, but it's not it's not super well backed, and so there's a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats, and so I had to be really studious about like why I was selected, how that and why the other person could argue that they were selected, and because the way my spot worked at the first games was I got selected for one event, but then there was a team event, and um, the argument really was over which selection took precedent. Um, Even though I could do the team event, and I had been doing the team event for a while, it was one of the reasons we qualified the team event, but I was the third um, level of points getter because I walked away from the team event midway through the selection period because I felt like we didn't have as strong an opportunity to perform in that event as we did in my personal event. So, which was, it was the right decision, but the way the criteria was written, it was really gray as to whether the team event selection took priority over the individual event. And the way, I won't get into the details and the way I ended up getting the decision made in my favor, but yeah, it wasn't. It was great. It was great to know that I was going, but it was also like it wasn't until that arbitration was over that I really felt like, okay, like I'm going.
Yeah.
And that was probably like an 8-week period.
But everything I've heard so far, that's like, I wouldn't expect that story to go any other way other than you had to fight through more stuff and fight through the arbitration.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, even when I was coming into the national team, it was always like, I was always kind of like the second string guy until I beat, which is the way it should go, but I had to beat the first string guys like multiple occasions in many different venues before. And that's what I tell athletes all the time is like, you have to solve your own problems. Like there's at no point can you expect the national team or professional teams or anybody to just say like, okay, like you've made it. I mean, like this is how you see the very, very best in the world, like the top 6 in the world. Like that's the situation they're in. Everybody else is like constantly fighting for their spot. So, if there's a hole in your training or in your preparation, and you say like, well, I wasn't as fast as so and so because he got more opportunities, well, that's your fault. Like figure it out. If they're getting more opportunities, then find a way to get your own. Like when I wasn't getting national team programs, like I was figuring out how to fly myself to Europe or to Australia or to race the best guys because that's what I needed to do. Like that's how it needed to happen. And yeah, so I mean, it is always, you always have to be moving forward, otherwise you're moving backwards.
Oh, that's great. That's great advice. So you get selected for the Olympics. You go to the Olympics. It's in Beijing. First off, what was the air quality like in Beijing? Because I've always heard it's been bad there. I haven't been to Beijing myself.
During the Olympics, it was amazing. It was fine.
Yeah.
But we did 2 or 3 test events before, and most of those were insane. Like there was one, I remember one test event we did there when I was training the day before we raced, and it's a 250-meter track indoor, and you couldn't clearly see the other side of the indoor track. The air quality was so bad inside.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was like, yeah, I mean, for people who were down here during the forest fires probably 2 years ago when it was super bad, like it was pretty much like that every day for one of the test events we were there.
Wow. Yeah, that must be very difficult to perform well at that kind of situation.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, I always did well there for some reason. Like some of my best performances were there, and I think it's because like when I was racing there, I was still so like I was still like so much like a guerrilla fighter, like just sort of like on your toes and like maybe not as well trained as the other guys, but just like just kind of like a bare knuckle brawler. And all the other guys were like just these super well oiled like F1 machines, and then you get a little freaking smog in their engine and they would just fall apart, right? So there wasn't as much of an edge to take off of me in that point in my career. So I think that's maybe why I always did well there.
So once you're in Beijing, you mentioned earlier you had a good story about running into your wrestling coaches in the athletes' village.
Yeah. So Lee Verling was the coach of the women's Canadian women's team in Beijing, and I think in London and maybe even Rio. He's been part of the program for a long time. But yeah, so we were in the village, and I actually looked him up. Like I was like, hey Lee, like he was he was probably one of the most influential coaches I had, cycling or wrestling ever. A lot of the tools and skills that I used in cycling came from Lee. Working with him as a wrestling coach, and yeah. So I connected with him in the village. I had lunch with him, I think, at one point, and yeah, it was just neat. It's just neat to see that sort of like coming together of Canadian sport community in that one place. It's and good to see them do well, and of course followed the wrestlers and knew a few of them, and yeah, so it was good to see them have a good showing there and sort of be part of that too.
Yeah, and what was the athletes' village like there? Because I've heard different results from different people at different Olympics, but
Beijing was good. Yeah, it was a good village. I think it was big. It was really big, and really well equipped, and probably, yeah. I mean, I think I probably was only at one other games that I felt like the village was even more put together than that one, um, and I think it was just such an anticipated games in general because it was a bit out of the ordinary um, for Olympics that once everybody saw it coming together and saw the way that the whole like Chinese community did get behind it in the end was like amazing. Like the thing I remember about the village and just the whole Beijing experience in general was just like how the organizers solved everything with manpower. Like every other Olympics or games I've been to, it's like technological or other sort of like innovative things to like solve issues like security or uh, interpersonal relationships or tourism or whatever. They have like iPads all over the city, but like Beijing, like they had in a city of I don't know how many million people that city is or billion or whatever it is. It's some crazy number. You could be anywhere in that city during the Olympics, and you could see 15 volunteers. Like not in the village, like anywhere in the city.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
that's
and
insane.
they all spoke English, and they'd all help you out. Like my mom came to the Olympics to watch, and she lives in Atlin, like and so she went from there, and she lives off grid in Atlin, okay, and she got on a plane and flew to the Olympics and was able to like function in Beijing because of the way they had it set up, like
Yeah.
crazy. Like it was just, and nothing against my mom, but it was just not, it's not her environment. Like we'll just say that, like so.
and
Yeah, and
and to
they made it happen.
and
So
to fill in for anybody that's listening that doesn't understand, what's Allen's population? 200?
ah, yeah, maybe like
Maybe,
two,
maybe
yeah,
200 people in a
yeah,
small northern BC Roma community about an hour and a
yeah,
half outside of Whitehorse
exactly,
to
yeah,
go to Beijing, which is 20 million people. Yeah, that's
yeah,
incredible. That's I've never heard
yeah,
that, and that's awesome.
yeah.
Um, you're there, you're racing. What's like going through your mind just before you're going to race? Because you've been pushing yourself now for this. This is where your goal is. You've been dream. Like, how are you getting your mind right before you race? Or are you just like, I'm here, I'm just going to go? Like,
I actually had a bit of a personality crisis like 2 days before my race
oh,
when I
really?
was there. Yeah, yeah. Well, because like what happened was like exactly what you said. Like up until that point, like my goal up until that point was like I get to the Olympics. Like I want to get to the Olympics. I want to be on the Olympic team. Never really. I mean, you dream of like being a medalist, but I never up to that point had thought about um, that as the end goal. Like it would be great, and I'd obviously do everything I could to prepare to try and achieve a medal performance. But for me, like it was really just like about getting there. And so like 2 or 3 days before, I was like, well, here I am. Like this is it. Like I did it. Like I'm gonna make the start line now. So um, yeah. So then I was like, well, what's next? Like what happens now? Um, and so I mean, I kind of had to like put that in my back pocket a little bit, but it ended up just being about like, okay, well, I got nothing to lose. Like up until that point, you always kind of had something to lose in every competition because you're trying to qualify, right? So you can't really screw it up. But once I was at the games, I was like, well, I can just kind of like put it all out there and see if I can actually compete with these guys. And so that's what I did. Like I kind of took a few risks and threw some hard bombs and like um, and at that point had the best international performance that I had to date in my career. Like I was like seventh or something, and it was like I don't think I think I'd barely finished inside the top 10 at an Olympic event. Like I'd finished higher than that in non-Olympic events, but not in an Olympic event up until that point. So yeah, so I mean, it was a bit of an eye opener of like, okay, like if you really apply yourself and you know kind of race to your strengths, like good things can happen. So um, yeah, that was kind of how I approached my first event. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so your training, what was your training regimen like? So if we talk with some other athletes and they're like almost year round, really focusing on stuff, like even the winter athletes, they're training in the summer in various
Mhm.
places. Like, did you get any downtime like that? Or like once the Olympics was your path, you were like, no, we're going nonstop?
No, yeah, like 2 weeks a year where you can take 2 weeks off.
So a week at
Um,
Christmas maybe, and then
no, I never had a week at Christmas because the track season was always through the winter. So
yeah.
I always had a competition like beginning of December, and then I usually had a World Cup probably in the first 2 weeks of January. So I'd probably have like 2 or 3 days off during Christmas. But no, my off time was usually like October,
Oh wow.
September, October. Uh, and cycling's weird too because it doesn't. If you were doing track, like it doesn't really have an off season because the track stuff's through the winter. But then you need the road racing, and like you need a professional road calendar to build the fitness base that you need to be able to compete in an endurance track anyway. So I'd race full time on the road during the summer, 60, 40 to 60 race days on the road, which isn't like a huge load for road pro, but when you back that up with like full time track racing in the winter, it was, it was tiring. But yeah, I mean, it was every day, maybe one day a week off, but um, but it's not the same kind of training as everybody, as a lot of other sports do. Like it's not necessarily as monotonous. Like you're out on the road a lot of time. You're, traveling to different venues and like riding through the French mountains and like, it's not, you're not in a gymnasium every day. So,
Yeah, you get to see probably amazing. Like you get to bike across some amazing country for sure.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there's some of the places I've seen is just like blow my mind.
Did you ever think, because like you said you were a Tour de France fan when you were younger and you watched it and stuff like that and cycling sport. Did you ever like contemplate like maybe trying the whole Tour de France thing?
Early in my career, I did, and then I realized pretty quickly that not pretty quickly, but like probably by the middle of my cycling career, the track just appealed to me quite a bit. But on the road, my aspirations were always more to be like a one day kind of classics guy. Like once I knew the sport a bit better, I really like things like uh, you know I like the idea of things like Paris-Roubaix and the Belgian classics and some of the hard man stuff a little bit more. I got to do some of that stuff, and I mean, I did do some of the classics and semi-classics on Spider Tech and Champion Systems, but yeah, I mean, I just invested so much in the track that by the time I got to the point where I could take road seriously, it wasn't really gonna pan out to be like a full-time pro tour road pro. Like I didn't have enough time left.
Yeah.
But I got to see those big events and I got to participate in them, and then as a director later, I got to drive 2 Tour de France's and 5 World Championships and stuff. So I still got to see a lot of
Oh
that, a
wow.
lot of that cool
I had
stuff.
no idea
Yeah,
that must have been pretty
yeah,
awesome
yeah,
too.
yeah. So working for a women's team, I got to drive all those, which is kind of more fun too because you're not killing yourself and you're
Yeah,
ripping around in
exactly.
fast cars and closed roads.
Yeah. So you've had quite the journey and quite the story. What would you tell to anybody, especially in a small rural community in like the Yukon, for example? Because Watson Lake was probably what, maybe 400 or 500 at most when you were growing up there. And that,
Yeah, it was maybe like 1,200. Yeah,
okay,
1,200 people, I
yeah.
think. Yeah.
What would you tell somebody in a small community like that that had aspirations of being an Olympian? What would you tell them?
Those situations give you more opportunity than just about any other situation. So if you compare growing up in one of those small communities versus growing up in Vancouver, say, um, you're gonna get sidelined out of pretty much any sport where you're not a super high achiever right out of the gate. But in the Yukon, in small communities, and in the Yukon specifically, for one, like the Yukon probably has the best sport funding system I have ever seen anywhere. Like
Wow.
like I've tried to raise funds for things up there and been told like, no, there's funding for that. No, there's funding for that. So like if you want to do something in sport, just ask. Like there's probably some sort of program that'll help you do it. But then the other thing is, most Canadian Olympians, I would say that I've met, are second and third sport athletes. It's just the way our sports system works for some reason. So you have way more opportunities to compete in a variety of different sports coming from a small community, build a much better platform for physical awareness and physical literacy and things that are going to be things that I'm not kidding were being taught to Olympians in order to help them achieve success are things that come naturally to small community athletes.
Wow.
So because they've had the opportunity to compete in so many different sports and have those body awareness activities, right? Like, so there are far more advantages to being, especially now, when you live in a world where expertise is at your fingertips. Like
Yeah.
any expertise deficit that you might have being in a small community is immensely available through the internet and networking and that kind of thing. So, man, take advantage of the fact that like you can do all these different sports. You can have the flexibility within small community schools. You can access small town funding support. Like the reason I was able to do a lot of what I was able to do was because like the community got behind me. Like try and get North Vancouver behind you if you're a middle tier provincial athlete. Like it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like I mean, there's so many more opportunities for small community athletes if they're willing to pursue it, and if they're willing to just not worry. The only challenge to entry are the sort of like um, snide kind of like elitist kind of looks you'll get from city teams the first time you play them. And you don't
Yeah.
quite do some of the things right. But then if you learn that stuff, you're going to be well on your way. Like there's just so many more platforms to help kids from small communities succeed. I think that I always tell our sport organizations who are looking, they're always looking for talent ID programs. And they want to go to the cities. I'm like, go find some kid in like small town Saskatchewan. He's going to have way more engine than any of these like crafted city kids that you're going to find. Like just do that, like, and your return on investment will be so much higher in terms of the sport program. Like it's
Yeah.
crazy.
So obviously you were a multi-sport athlete growing up and doing everything like you said, and obviously you're a
Yep.
big believer in multi-sport athlete. So like you got kids now, are they involved in multiple sports, and are you steering them towards anything, or you just letting them just do their thing and figure it out as they go?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of just let them do their thing. They're a little bit small. I mean, we've let them try stuff, and um like my daughter's done gymnastics and cycling, soccer, so yeah, I mean, I guess they're kind of on their way to that, but I'm very conscious of not uh putting sport as a lifestyle onto them. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think it should be a part of their life, but I don't ever want them to feel like because I was an athlete they need to be an athlete as a profession, because there's a lot of drawbacks to it too. I think, and unless it's something you really, really want, it's a really, really difficult way to go about living.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, but I mean, I think I'm a big believer in just like active living in general, and I mean, I think everybody is probably, but yeah, I mean, I think for kids especially, most of the time, I think 99% of problems can be solved with some sort of activity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great words of wisdom. I'm curious. What is your craziest story from your travels, from your experience? Like it could be from when you were like 8 or 9, 10 years old, or like last week. What's the craziest story you have?
Oh man, oh, gosh, that's a tough one. Um, Jeez, this there's got to be okay. Well, there's a few, but one that'll probably resonate with a few people, and they'll probably have a good context on it. And it's not like that. It's not that crazy, but anyway, I'll tell you this one anyway. So, one of the coolest things about my career that I did was I got to compete in two World Cups in Moscow, and um, and the track there is crazy. It's like it's a gigantic track, like just like you would picture, like right out of any kind of 1980s movie, like depicting like the Russian sports system. Like basically, it's like the same as the American sports system, but like everything's just bigger. right? Like the track's like 30% bigger, and like the number of fans is like 30% more and whatever. So I remember I did a race there, and I got called for drug testing, and the whole, it was like the middle of winter, and like the whole place was just like kind of shut down and dark, and like they took me to this room where they do the drug testing, and you go through the whole thing with the DSO, the drug control officer, and he's like he's from the UK or something, but they have a Russian doctor there who's like overseeing the whole thing, and very atypical sort of like Russian guy, very like stern looking face, like he's obviously like done a lot of hard work, through his whole life, kind of middle aged, and it's one of my first big drug tests, probably, in the first few years. Probably only been tested 5 or 6 times before this, and I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble producing the B sample, right? I'm like,
well, there's a lot of pressure there.
Oh, and you're like, in the room is like this like concrete room, like down under the track. It's like very, I don't know, it's like very eerie and kind of like this creepy feeling. And
well, sorry to interrupt here. Like when I was told before by other athletes, it's like sometimes they make you like pull your pants down substantially and pull your shirt up so they get clear view of everything going on.
Like all the time, not sometimes. Yeah. Like that's yeah. So that's the way this happens. But that's what the Russian doctor is there for, right? He's the guy who's supposed to like see everything. So, and I'm just like, I'm standing there, like, like pants around my knees, and I can't do anything. And then I just hear this faucet turn on, and I turn around, and like the Russian doctor's just standing there in the back of the room. And he's turned the faucet on, and then he just gives me this very like affirming nod, like you're gonna be okay now. Like the faucet does it every time. No words, just like yeah. And sure enough, like I get the sample out and everything, but I was just like, this is so bizarre. Like this whole scene is just when like the wrestler came and talked to us in the Yukon and said, you should go to the Olympics. Like there was no point in that book that would get written about this. Was there a chapter that had this happening in it? Like I was like, this is not the experience that I expected from a typical like Olympic pathway, right? But yeah, it was weird. It was a weird thing.
Well, and speaking of a book, like you have quite the story. Have you ever thought about writing a book or getting some memoirs going or something like
that? There's not for me personally, but I'm part of a group right now that's crafting something. It's a few of us, and it's kind of a Canadian cycling story. I won't let too much out of the bag, but it's hopefully coming soon, and I'll have some role in that, I think.
Well, that'll be awesome. I'll definitely have to subscribe. You'll have to let me know, and I will definitely pick it up. That'll be good.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for this. This was awesome. I really appreciate it. I think everybody listening is going to really appreciate your story and everything about it. So thank you so much for your time.
Hey, no problem. I appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing some of the other ones you put up. It's going to be a good journey, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. You probably know, we're going to do one with Jeannie Lawson here soon.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to have her, and we did Daria, and then, we have some other people that aren't Olympic athletes, but they went to high level athletics and stuff like that. And then we're going to get some more of our skiers. We're getting some younger skiers now because you and Jeannie are kind of like the pioneers. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Setting the standard and stuff like that. So yeah, we're going to launch it May, and I will. I'll send you a link or something like that. And if you want to check it out,
you'll have to ask her about our closing ceremonies together.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad. What other things are we because we're gonna do her on Wednesday? So what other things? Closing ceremonies together with you. What else? Is there another good tidbit for me?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that'd be the big one. I know she's got some other stories, but that was the one where we we'd always kind of overlapped in text, right? Like in in the headlines and stuff, but we were never really training in the same place. But at the Olympics, the closing ceremonies, we found each other, and we did something fun. So yeah, you have to ask her about that.
Okay, thanks for the heads up, because we might have missed it otherwise. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi, Tanya. Basically, I'll just ask you a few questions about stuff. It shouldn't take too long. Zach only kind of brought up, he's like, because we're like, how did you get into cycling? And he basically was, well, I'm 20 years old. I was just finishing wrestling. And I saw cycling. I just was going to give it a try. And he said he showed up to the place to start, and you were kind of the first
Yeah.
person he met, and he didn't have a
Yes.
bike.
Yeah.
So what was your thought when somebody's showing up here to try and do cycling without a bike?
Oh, well, I think it's my job to sort of, help steer and recognize determination. And so if someone doesn't have a bike, that doesn't mean they're not going to get one. So, one of the things okay, just get yourself a bike and then show up. And so he got himself a bike and he showed up and that was it. And it's like, okay, here's your group. You ride with them 5 times a week in between your wrestling practice. And then within the summer, he went from Cat 5 to being Cat 1, 2, 3.
Wow. Yeah. Like he was much more modest than that, but was there,
Yeah.
was there any chance when has anyone else ever shown up without a bike?
No, I don't think any, but it's not surprising. Like, but no, you're right. Nobody showed up ever without a bike. And he was just more interested. I want to do this. It's great.
And then, so he said he came back like the next day with a bike. He just went and found some bike on like Kijiji or thing and just showed back up with a bike.
Yeah, pretty much.
Do you have any lasting memories of Zach, of his experience in his time? Because he's kind of has such an unusual story.
Well, it's almost, the ones that are successful are the ones that have a unique story. And so I think that's what's funny is that, all cyclists have a unique story. So their unique story is just commonplace. One person might start in a different discipline and then as you recognize as cyclists, not get older, but as they sort of mature and their stories become more well known, you realize that their stories are very similar in their uniqueness. And I remember this one couple of seasons. The French, the Quebec team was always the team to beat, and there was nationals in Calgary one year, and Zach won, and we put a team pursuit together, and we beat Team Quebec, and so that was sort of a big milestone of success in terms of the national scene. And then the following year, nationals were in Dieppe, and he crashed. And all cyclists usually have this sort of crash that they sort of earn their stripes on, and so he crashed and had to take him to the hospital, and he's lying there, a lot of pain. I can't remember, it was a collarbone or hip or something. And then the nurse came in and she was chatting, and then she mentioned something like, "Oh, your wife." And we looked at each other and it was like, no, I'm the coach. And it was just this funny little thing. It's like, no. And so I think, when it takes, 20 years to look back and say, for someone to, have that sense of like, oh, these two people sort of care about each other and, in a sort of a loving way, in a sense that I'm caring for this athlete and I just want the best for this athlete. And someone recognized that as like sort of this relationship, but that wasn't the relationship. It was just a caring relationship and easygoing, fluid conversation. And so I think that was sort of the special, was that it was a really good relationship, and it was just so great to see Zach move on and go on to so many great things. And I was able to, connect with him along the way, whether it was the Olympics, whether it was the World Championships on the track, and just being able to see him, gain that success. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Was there another moment besides the one you just shared that really reminds you of Zach, or sticks in your mind, or it was a really good experience you had with Zach?
Yeah, I think that one of the beauties of, Zach is he'd always sort of come back with these very interesting but yet whimsical, stories or perspectives that to like kind of get over yourself. And there'd always be, some sort of story about the Yukon or, sort of toughen up because, when we were in the Yukon, this is what we did. And there was just sort of this commonplace of his sort of humor that, would sort of, stop the room or the group of athletes from sort of complaining or whatever the situation was. He'd always, say something and it would just sort of crack everybody up and snap everybody out of their funk. And that was always a great part of having Zach around.
Yeah, I hadn't met Zach before we did the podcast, and I have to say he was quite hysterical. Like he's a very funny guy, and he had me and my producer laughing the entire time. It was really good.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time. We don't want to take any more of your time,
Good
and
luck.
have yourself a wonderful day.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.